So, yes. And yeah, the next section. So, my own employer, CfBT, had told us that in Brisbane, before we left, that Maria would also probably, quote, get a job with them when she arrived in Brunei. They then changed their mind when she did get to Brunei. I don't quite know what happened there. But anyway, she was offered a job with a local private school, but at a much less salary. Al Falah, it was called. It was an Arabic school, and it was teaching English in primary. Uh, After a couple of months, CfBT actually took over the school, re-employed her on a casual basis, and at 1/3 of the salary she would have been getting with a proper contract as CfBT. The reality is that she did not get these positions because the Ministry of Education would not hire her because she was not a native speaker and an Anglo-Celt. The Ministry of Education in Brunei would not accept CfBT teachers who were not native speakers of English. If she'd been of Anglo-Celtic origin, she would have been snapped up by both schools, the International School of Brunei and the Jeradong International School, either as a mainstream primary teacher or indeed as a Spanish teacher, because they were both teaching Spanish. This is a fact that no one can deny, no matter how much it is dressed up in other language. But yeah, it was just this policy of the Ministry of Education. Um, Now, sometimes when I was there in the early years, it seemed to me that the more seriously I took my job at Menglait, the more dangers there were to my survival. And yeah, that I found that really difficult to cope with. The more seriously I took it. For example, I really wanted to show my students a video, but the video was so difficult to organize. It was in a special laboratory place and you had to get a key from it, and the administrator who controlled that was very uncooperative and didn't want to really that room to be used. And it took me hours and hours of work and negotiating trying to get the uh, classroom available for the students so that they could just watch this video. And I almost lost my temper with this administrator. Fortunately, I didn't, because it would have damaged my professional relationships. But yeah, that was very frustrating. A lot of teachers just said, "Oh, who cares? Whatever. Just don't. That was just keep a low profile. Don't take it too seriously." But yeah. Anyway, during this early period again of 2001, 2002, I remember having a successful trip to Labuan for a week. And during the holidays, Labuan was an island close to Brunei. It was actually in Malaysia. And my son's girlfriend came with us. And she seemed a very nice girl, and we were very pleased that she had met Roger in their first year, his first year at school there. And he would have been very lonely, I think, otherwise in his first year in Brunei, because he was coming at the age of 15, quite a difficult age to change country and culture and school. Anyway, I can't help thinking just how different my eldest son's adolescence was from mine, because certainly I think his has been a great improvement on mine. My mum and dad were never able to enjoy the pleasure of seeing their son's girlfriend at such close quarters. In fact, I never saw them either because I never had any girlfriends in my adolescence. Then one day, yes, towards the end of the year, we got some bad news from CfBT. They phoned us one Saturday night at about 6 o'clock to tell Maria that she should not go to work on Monday because the school, like CfBT, had decided only to employ native speakers. Suddenly, anyway. This was a sudden change of policy. I could never understand why she wasn't, given much more notice. I think someone should have come and visited her and talked to her about it, but they just phoned her up 24 hours before the school and told her not to come in. Yeah, I wasn't very happy with that. But you never know. It's probably the ministry were behind it because they had these top-down approach, and they would just come in and say, no, 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 you can't have that. Anyway, I was not happy. But we were accustomed to the ignorance underpinning this policy, of course, of the Ministry of Education. By this time, we were accustomed to it. Yeah, so then towards the end again of that year, I had the following thoughts when I was still at Menglait. This is before I moved to Maktab Science. These are my thoughts. As a family, I've had to stay on the international circuit in order to provide bread and butter for myself and my family. Of course, as a positive byproduct of this, we have been able to get to know and enjoy many cultures and countries. But when it's come down to it, in each project, and for each project, read country that I've been to, there's been a sort of a crunch point. And at this crunch point, sometimes I've been prepared to sell my principles more than at other times. I've had to do it in order to survive and hence provide bread and butter for myself and my family. But I like to think that I've not ever sold myself to the extent that I became a complete cynic. And this cynicism, I often observed it in the expatriates around me, and their attitude would be, oh, keep your head down and just do what they want. I could never do that. I always had to take the job a bit more seriously than that. I think the result of this was financially we were therefore never as well off as many of our contemporaries. The basic equation didn't seem to change. In Ghana, my first job, I was ready to resign after 6 weeks when I realized I was actually, by teaching these young students, I was contributing to the rural depopulation of the village of Wa. They were all going to go to Accra, to university, or even overseas. Yeah, and I realized that. I was very upset and almost resigned, but I didn't. I hung on because I was single and I was enjoying myself. 30 years later, though, in Brunei, I was always close to resigning many times because I couldn't tolerate the dysfunctionality of the system. But I survived for 9 years. Now, what happened in between? Well, if you look at each place I was in, there are some similarities. At King's Hospital in Dublin, I was dissatisfied, certainly with the principal and his corrupt little regime of staff bullies. They didn't like me anyway. I was single. At Methodist College in Belfast, I was dissatisfied because I was not fulfilling my ambition to explore other cultures. Yeah, I was single. I could afford to do that. In Malawi, again, I was dissatisfied with the rigid system of the nuns. But again, I was single. I could move. In Colombia, though, um, I was dissatisfied definitely with the corruption. But I was actually fired there without any cause. And yeah, then that was more difficult because at that time I had a wife and a small baby. In Mexico, again, I was dissatisfied with the nepotism in school. And so, again, moving from there was quite complicated. In Dubai, I was dissatisfied again with the teaching and the corruption, and they didn't like me. So I had no option there in the end. In Melbourne, I was dissatisfied with the corruption. I survived longer than all the other senior administrators in that school's history. But in the end, it was very complicated leaving that school and finding another job. In Brisbane, I lasted for 6 years, but I had to resign in the end because I knew I was about to lose my job. That's why we came to Brunei. So in almost all the cases I resigned, but it was just a question of how long I lasted. But in Brunei, it was not possible to resign for various reasons. Firstly, because the children had to finish their high school. And secondly, it wasn't fair on Maria, who understandably was fed up, like I was myself, with moving. Thirdly, I was getting older and less employable. Once I was over 55 as a teacher, it became very difficult for me to get a job anywhere. I had my eyes open all the time and made inquiries, but very little interest was registered after the age of 55. Even though I had an educational doctorate, I had 3 master's degrees. Now, nobody told me it would be that difficult. I found it out for myself the hard way. So I had to stay for 9 years in Brunei. The first few years in Brunei were certainly much better than in Australia, than in Brisbane and in Melbourne, in so many ways. The children were doing well at school. They also enjoyed themselves out of school. They had a great social life, they had great friends, and they enjoyed life in general. Maria and I also both had jobs. Not at the very beginning, but after I think 3 years, Maria got a full-time job at ISB. However, I somehow still felt anxious. Now, I went to the doctor in Brunei and he told me that I had become addicted to the stressful life in Australia. This was an interesting diagnosis from him. He wasn't a very widely respected GP, but I liked him well enough. He said that my body had become addicted to adrenaline. I could understand that. So in the early years in Brunei, with less stress, he said, I was experiencing withdrawal symptoms from the lack of adrenaline. And the withdrawal symptoms were basically the symptoms of depression. That is why he said you feel depressed. So even though I was more relaxed and everything was going better, I seemed to feel depressed. Yeah, sounds a bit Irish to me. Yeah, the whole thing really. But His explanation and diagnosis actually had a certain logic to it. And I certainly couldn't think of a better explanation, and nor could he. But he definitely did the wrong thing. He started me on Xanax to help me relax during the day at school. I was so busy in the heat, rushing around different classes and stuff. So yeah, just to slow me down and kind of relax. Xanax was very good at that. However, it's an anti-anxiety drug, and it worked for me very well during the day when I was teaching. Calmed me down. But I started using it at night to get me to sleep because night was the problem. I couldn't get to sleep. I woke up then after 4 hours, and of course that was not enough sleep if I had to work the next day. The problem with Xanax was it was highly addictive. So after about 2 years at Menglait, I found myself addicted to Xanax, and I had to take more and more. Not a lot, but there was a slow, gradual increase in the dosage, and there were side effects of Xanax. The stress levels then overall throughout the 9 years increased as we started to think about where the children would go after they left high school and what we, Marie and I, would do when CfBT finally terminated me. That was the challenge.